Welcome to Journey of the Soul, Lesson 5. The title of this evening's lesson is Where We Go Again. So last week was Where We Go, and we discussed heaven and hell from a Jewish perspective, Gan Eden and Gehenna. And today, the title of today's class is Where We Go Again, and we are going to try to understand a little bit about reincarnation. Reincarnation is a fascinating topic and a very, very popular topic. I will say I have moderated or emceed or whatever the word is, more than one, stump the rabbi, crossfire kind of session. And inevitably, it always comes up. What is Judaism's view on reincarnation? Or what happens when one is reincarnated? How do you get reincarnated? Can I come back as a dog? Can I come back as my loved one? All these interesting questions from a Jewish perspective. So some of you are familiar with the fact that tonight's lesson, hold on just a second, I'm going to close the door to my office. Some of you are familiar with the fact that this course that we're teaching now is actually a revamped version of an older JLI course, which aired, for lack of a better word, 5 years ago, across Chabad houses across the world. And obviously, lots has been added. It's been revamped, restructured, etc. And as part of that, tonight's lesson, I don't know that this is important in any way, but tonight's lesson is actually a brand new lesson. They've done a lot more research on the topic of reincarnation. And I hope that we'll walk away with some answers. But that being said, I want to share with you a story. They tell the story about two fellas who come in to take a job interview. And as part of the job interview, there's a written exam. So they sit them both down in the same room, a couple feet away from each other, and they sit down to take the exam. And after the exam, they come out and they tell them their results. 20 questions on the exam. You got 19 out of 20 right, and you got 19 out of 20 right. And which question did you guys get wrong? You both got the same question wrong. So the two applicants are looking at them and they say, so who did you choose? So they turn to one of them, they say, you got the job. And the other fellow looks and goes, hey, what happened? We both got an equal mark. What's going on here? So he says, the difference lied in what you wrote for that 20th answer, which you got incorrect, and what he wrote for his 20th answer, and he got incorrect. You see, he wrote, I don't know. You wrote, me neither. So I think tonight's topic is definitely a topic about which a lot of us can say, including myself, I don't know. And everybody around us can look at each other and say, me neither. Reincarnation is a very, very tricky one. And actually, in Jewish literature, you don't find that much. You'll find references to it here and there. Most often, and if we have some time, maybe we'll do this for fun, you'll see references to who is reincarnated from who. This person is reincarnated from that person because they're making up for some sort of something or whatever it is. But I do want to clarify that the reason I feel comfortable giving tonight's lesson is because I'm not afraid to say I don't know. And I'm sure that many of you will have some questions, and I will say I don't know. And either that will or will not be a reflection of the fact that Jewish literature doesn't know. Sometimes it will be, sometimes it won't be. It'll just be that I haven't read that particular piece of Jewish tradition. And sometimes it'll be because that hasn't been passed down to us. We're not told everything. But we are going to do our best to try to give a full picture and answer as many questions as we can. I'm still laughing. Okay, I'm sorry. So that being said, it was a good one. It was a good joke. I agree. And by the way, you should know it was a good joke. And it's very, very hard to deliver jokes on Zoom, especially to a large crowd where everybody mutes out of common, courtesy, because I get nothing. I deliver the punchline and I see a whole bunch of people, laughing, and I get nothing, audibly. Anyways, all right. So, but I do appreciate all the muting. That it's actually perfect. So let's start off, if I may, on page 175 in your textbooks. And I'm going to give you guys 60 seconds to do this. And while you're doing it, I'm going to call on different people to share their answers. So this is a true or false. Okay, lots of questions here. So we'll go through it really quickly. In your opinion, number one, belief in reincarnation is basic to Judaism. Circle one, T or F, true or false. In the Jewish view, reincarnation means that a soul that inhabited one's body returns to inhabit another, true or false. I encourage you to do this with a pen, because the goal of this exercise, as we do very often, is to try to see where you're at now, and we're going to revisit this all the way at the end of the lesson to see what we've learned after we've explored the text. Number three, a human soul can be reincarnated in a non-human entity, such as an animal or plant, true or false? Let's get some answers. Brett, what do you think? Is belief in reincarnation basic to Judaism? True or false?
I would immediately say no. Jews don't believe in reincarnation.
Okay, you would say false. All right, so put that down. Yehuda, what would you say? In the Jewish view, reincarnation means that a soul that inhabited one body returns to inhabit another? What do you think, Yehuda? You say true. All right. Marilyn, what do you say? Number three, a human soul can be reincarnated in a non-human entity such as an animal or plant. True or false? I can't hear you, sorry.
False.
False. Okay. Mickey, number five, the purpose of doing good in one's current lifetime is to be reincarnated as a person of higher status. True or false?
What's one? Number five?
Number five.
Oh, okay. Purpose of doing good ones.
No, number 4.
Wait,
Number
no, you
five,
said
number
number
five.
five. I would say true. I don't know.
Okay. Esther, number six, a soul is reincarnated as a penalty for sins committed in a prior life. True or false? I think she froze. Esther,
False.
sorry, yeah, go ahead.
False.
False. Okay, number seven. Let's go to the other Esther. Esther Necha. Most souls today are reincarnations. What do you say? True or false? Esther Necha. You have to unmute.
True.
True. Okay. So we have our answers. I mean, I'm sure lots of people disagreed with some of the people who were chosen, but we have answers, and hopefully most of you have done the exercise. Let's leave that as is. We will get back to it. And you know what? It's a perfect.
What about question number 4?
Did I skip it?
Yeah.
Okay, well then, Ron, you get it. A reincarnated soul does not have its own identity, but shares its identity with someone who lived in a previous lifetime. What do you say, Ron?
False.
False. All right. Okay, don't worry, we're going to get to all the answers. but for now, let's leave it. Okay, and there's no better way than to start today's lesson than by opening up with text number 1, or really question number 1. Do Jews believe in reincarnation? The answer is 100%. It is 100% a Jewish belief. And text 1 is a gorgeous way to illustrate this.
100% yes or 100% no?
100% yes. It is absolutely part of Jewish belief. So, and we're going to unpack that today. And there's no better way to illustrate that this is a tenet of Jewish belief than, many of you know that we talk all the time about how much Jews disagree with each other, right? 2 Jews, 4 opinions, right? Is that what they say? 2 Jews, 3 opinions? So Barbie, if I can ask you to read for us text 1, okay? But before you do so, let me tell you where it's from. Text 1 is from the Siddur, okay? Now, the text in front of us is from the Siddur Tehillat Hashem, okay? Which is the blue one most of you are familiar with from Chabad. However, this does not differ, not between Ashkenazim and Sfaradim. This is not one of those sections, they just have to choose one. So because this is a Chabad course, they chose the Chabad one. But if you look in Ashkenaz Siddur, if you look in a Sfarad Siddur, if you look in any Siddur, you will see the exact same text. Where is this? So as Jews, we pray 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, evening, Shacharit, Mincha, and Arvit. And after Arvit, there is a prayer that's called Kriyat Shema She'al Hamita, which means the bedside prayer before retiring at night. And believe it or not, it's supposed to be very meditational, and you're supposed to kind of recap the day and that kind of thing. And as part of that, the opening prayer talks about, and we're not going to focus on this part because forgiveness could be a whole topic in and of itself. But the opening prayer, it talks about, throughout the day, I may have wronged someone and I should forgive them properly, etc. Now, we're not going to talk about forgiveness, but there's a particular part of this prayer that's very, very pertinent to today's topic. Barbie, when you're ready, text 1, please.
I am ready. Okay, Master of the universe, I hereby forgive anyone who has angered or vexed me or sinned against me, either physically or financially, against my honor or anything else that is mine, whether accidentally or intentionally, inadvertently or deliberately, by speech or by deed, in this incarnation or in any other. Can I just say, if if this becomes a habit, this really will make you sleep better, because so often at night in the dark, we start thinking about those that we're angered at, those that didn't do right by me.
Hold on,
And
Barbie. Barbie, can I just
often-
ask you, before you keep going, can I ask you to share with everybody what you do for a living?
Yeah, I'm in the business of helping people
What do
to
you
get
do?
out of their
What's your
knots
professional title?
in life. Social work.
Social work.
Yeah.
I just
Okay.
wanted people to understand that, because Barbie's not just shooting off at the mouth. She actually does this for a living. She deals with people who do stay up at night, I imagine.
Yeah.
Because
I
these
guess they call that insomniacs.
Yep.
But so often in the night, you know, we're alone, we're you know, with our own thoughts, and it's dark, and there's nothing that creeps up except these usually negative thinking patterns. So I think it's a great habit to
Absolutely.
follow this.
Absolutely.
think
I am
it'll
with
be
you,
helpful.
Barbie.
Huh?
And I say this prayer every night before I
Do
go to
you?
sleep. Yeah.
Do
as part of the Kriyat Shema Sha'alamit, as part of the Shema. But
Yeah.
I will share that it's very, very important, but and it's very helpful, and it's psychologically probably very, very useful. But let's leave all those points aside. Okay, because I want to
Okay.
focus on the topic for today, which is it's interesting that every siddur, no matter what, chose to copy not copy, but chose to put down from Jewish literature, somewhere they got a Jewish tradition somewhere, that I forgive anyone who wronged me in this incarnation or in another. And that's where we see the first time the Hebrew word Gilgul, at least the first time tonight, Gilgul, which means an incarnation. So it is definitely a Jewish belief. Now, that is where I won't say traditional texts stop, because we have lots of other texts about incarnation. But when we want to try to paint a full picture of it, we are going to have to dive into Kabbalah. And so introduction number 2 for tonight is that tonight, a lot of the texts from tonight are going to come from the Kabbalah. What is the Kabbalah? The Kabbalah is the mystical side of the Torah. The word Kabbalah actually means tradition, so kind of something that was passed down, received from generation to generation. For many years, the Kabbalah was very, very secretive, only taught, by one person to another person, one-on-one, for over 40 years old, etc. I'm sure many of you have heard these details. Recently, the Kabbalah has had a resurgence, and most influentially through Hasidus, which is kind of the part of Kabbalah that actually can affect and embody our lives. Some of the more famous texts of the Kabbalah, of course, beginning with the Zohar, which is its own mystical work, whether it was written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai or even somebody prior to him, is debated. And then later on, you have the Arizal by Isaac Luria, the founder of Lurianic Kabbalah. And then, of course, until recently, by recently I mean 250 years ago, 300 years ago, the Baal Shem Tov and Hasidus and etc. Eventually Chabad Hasidus, etc. Now, the Kabbalah, it's important to point out, even though it might not have been famous and well-known, etc., was fully accepted by all sections of Judaism. This is not to be confused with those of you that are familiar, and if you're not, that's fine. This is just Jewish history. 200-300 years ago, there was this rift between Jews about Hasidim and the non-Hasidim, etc. This is not to be confused with that. The Kabbalah, like its name points out, goes all the way back to Sinai, and it was passed down together with the written Torah and the oral Torah, except that it wasn't as revealed. And a lot of what we're going to quote today is going to be from there. So that's just another general. I know that people tend, especially when we're talking about this topic, and we've had it this course already, I know that people tend to ask, so how do we know this? Where do we know this from, etc. So that's kind of at least a semi-answer to that question. And of course, whenever we're going to talk about Kabbalah, it's important to make sure that we denounce, because Kabbalah has become very popular and very exciting and very hip. It's important to make sure that we denounce that there are movements of people that have chosen to study Kabbalah divorced of Judaism. And that, of course, is extremely problematic, a topic for another night. But usually, if you boil it down to where it's all going, it's usually money, those types of movements. And I don't want to name any particular centers specifically, but they want people's money, and eventually it leads to that, even if it takes some time. But leaving all that aside, so let's dive into where we are. So in order to understand how reincarnation works, we got to answer some of the basic questions. Beginning with, for tonight's crowd that has been with us now already 5 weeks, right? And we've been talking a lot about souls, right? We've been talking about souls and how souls are our identity, and souls exist before our lifetime, whatever that is, right? And then they exist after our lifetime. And whoa, so hold on a second. So then the very concept of reincarnation needs some clarification. What's going on here? You said my soul exists beforehand, so the soul that I have now is kind of like recycled goods. What is this, right? Or damaged goods, even worse, right? Am I here to fix some mistake that some yokel made 1,000 years ago, right? There's a lot of kind of questions like that. So let's start at the beginning. How does this whole soul? How many souls are there? Do they divide into separate sections, etc.? And so we have to start really all the way at Adam, A-D-A-M, and particularly the splitting of the atom, or the splitting of Adam, A-D-A-M. Adam HaRishon, the first man, contained a soul, and the Kabbalah tells us, particularly now we're quoting Rabbi Chaim Vital in a book called Sefer HaGilgulim, very appropriate, the book of reincarnation, and he shares with us exactly how souls work. Catherine, can I ask you to read for us, please? Text 2, we're on page 177. Sorry, you're muted. I apologize. There you go.
Okay. Is it okay now?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay. It all began with one master soul, the soul of Adam, which included all future souls. Subsequently, this master soul passed on to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and was then divided among the 12 tribes. Afterward, the soul was further partitioned among the 70 souls, the descendants of Jacob that accompanied him to Egypt, and eventually among the 600,000 souls who left Egypt.
Okay. So let's start at the beginning, huh? Adam has one soul, what we can call the master soul, all right? And that master soul really contains within it the souls of everyone on this Zoom and everyone that exists in this world, Jews and non-Jews alike. From Adam, that soul was split for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, eventually to the 12 tribes, the 70 souls of Jacob's family that went down to Egypt, and then the 600,000, what we're going to call root souls that were present at Sinai. All right, a lot of questions here. Number one, let me start by saying that Adam's soul, and I mentioned this briefly in passing earlier, included both Jewish and non-Jewish souls. For the purpose of today's conversation, we're going to talk about Jewish souls. That's one kind of clarification. Clarification number two, eventually we arrive at 600,000 root souls. I know this is not a class on marriage, but I feel it's important to address one point, which you may or may not be familiar with regards to souls. And that is as follows. 600,000 is the census of only men that there were at Mount Sinai, not women. Okay? Now, according to Jewish tradition, and we can assume that there was an average of 600,000 women that were present as well. Now, according to Jewish tradition, and you may have heard this if you've ever been to any chuppah, any Jewish chuppah, one of the first things the rabbi shares is that every soul that every human being possesses, particularly Jews, is split in two. You may have heard the word bashert, that there is someone out there, whether a person ends up marrying them or not, and whether a person ends up divorcing them or not, and we could get into people who marry multiple women or multiple men, that's a whole different discussion. And like I said, it's not a class of marriage, but just to give a very basic idea, every soul has a masculine side to it and a feminine side to it. We've touched on this earlier in some of the earlier classes on souls. Again, we didn't want to get sidetracked. I'm going to try not to do that now as well, but it's just important to understand that. So 600,000 souls were present at Sinai. Those 600,000 souls were obviously divided into 1.2 million people at least, male parts of the soul and female parts of the soul. This is going to become important later as well when we talk about the soul's mission in the world and the fact that there's different mitzvahs that apply to men and that apply to women, right? So one thing that's important to understand is that I can never light Shabbat candles or bake challah or go to the mikveh or any of the other mitzvahs that are particular to women. And that's obviously designed as such by the Torah. And women can never put on tefillin and can never, other mitzvahs that apply to men. But there is a feminine part to my soul that is doing those mitzvahs, and that's doing those mitzvahs for me. Now, Baruch Hashem, 5 years ago, I was introduced to that soul, so I now know who that is. But that doesn't take away the fact that 10 years ago, even before I was married, that soul, in this case, Gitti, I'm happy to share her name, it's not a secret, was lighting Shabbat candles for me. This is a very important thing to understand, because the feminine part of the soul is the one that does that. When we're talking about the spiritual part of the mitzvah, I was putting on tefillin for Gitti as I am today, and Gitti was lighting Shabbat candles for me as she was before then. I just feel very uncomfortable using all this terminology because it's so weird and it's so physical. I didn't light. It's not like I put on tefillin for Gitti. I put on tefillin for me, but Gitti is me, and Gitti and I am Gitti. So therefore, it works that way. You understand? The two halves of the soul are one soul, and together they fulfill their mission in this world, if that makes any sense. Okay, so that's just to get some of those questions out of the way. Yes, Ron, go ahead.
What is the gulf?
What is the?
Gulf.
Where do you see guf? Sorry.
No. I understood that there was a repository for the creation of all that was containing all souls, and then when a new person is born, they get soul from that repository.
Okay. But what was
That's not a Jewish thing?
1 second. What was your question? What is the guf?
Yes.
Guf is the Hebrew word for body.
Okay.
I'm just not sure. Did you see that somewhere here tonight?
No, I did not. I had mentioned it before to Rabbi Hanoka, and he had told me what it was at that time.
Okay.
But maybe my understanding of it.
Okay, no, 1 second. So what you're talking about when you say the repository of souls, I don't know where. There's a lot of information, so we're going to try to focus here. In text 2, we're introducing the repository of souls. That is exactly the idea, and that's where we're trying to arrive. So to bring this back up, just like a tree, which starts with one. I'll bring it back for you because I thought that was a great. Sometimes the slides are not so great. Where were we? There we go. Sometimes they're actually great. So Adam's soul is kind of like the root, the master soul. That's kind of like the seed, and from that it slowly blossomed and split until it became 600,000 souls. Now, once it was 600,000 souls, that's where it stops. There are 600,000 root souls. There were never any more, and there never will be any more. Okay. Now, a lot of questions here, right? So how does that add up? How do each of us have a soul when we know that there are more than 600,000 souls in this world? Okay. So we're going to get to that soon. When we talk about the fact that each of those souls has many sparks to it and how that works, okay? So hold that question for now. Another important question, which for some reason when it comes to reincarnation, people forget to ask is why? Why? Because it's such a fascinating topic, so people just like to hear about it. But why would there be reincarnation at all? Okay, so in order to understand this, obviously we need to understand how the mission of a soul works down here in this world. So Larry, if we can ask you to start for us in text 3. Okay, this boils down to 3 points. So we'll do all 3 of them and then we'll kind of talk about them as a whole. So Larry, text 3, please.
Okay. Furthermore, you must know that every person must fulfill all of the 613 mitzvot. If a soul does not fulfill all of 613 mitzvot in action, speech, and thought, it must be reincarnated until it completes them all.
Okay, so there are 613 mitzvot. Now let's talk about this for a second, okay? Anybody want to try to type in the chat? How many mitzvot do you think we can do today? I mean, we obviously can't bring sacrifices. The temple is no longer standing, right? So it's not 613. Anybody? Brett, 0.0001. No, that's wrong. I believe the number is, is anybody guessing? I'm sorry, I see some people typing. Go ahead. Anybody? I believe the number is 87. Okay. I know it sounds, it's like very, very low when we think about 613 mitzvot. It's not 400 at all, at least. Well, I should clarify. It's 87 positive mitzvot. The 613 mitzvot are split into 365 negatives. In other words, don'ts. Don't do this, don't do that. And the 248 positives. Of the 248 positives, 87 of them are applicable today. Now, the 365 negative mitzvot, I mean, we could have a conversation about it, but obviously they all apply today, but obviously some of them are not even possible to do. You know what I mean? Like, don't marry a Midianite, which I believe is one of the mitzvot. I don't know that we know who the Midianites are today. And that's a very specific negative mitzvah. I'm sure nobody's married to a Midianite, but I'm not sure that we know who they are to begin with. Or I don't know, other ones that we can think of. In any event, leaving that aside for a second, even from those 87, some of them are very specific mitzvot. You know, I wouldn't wish on anybody that they should fulfill the mitzvah of divorce. The mitzvah of divorce is a mitzvah. To give a get to your wife, to give a bill of divorce to your wife, should the necessity arise. Now, some people end up divorcing, and for good reason, as per Torah view, and that's the right thing as per the Torah for them to do, and that's a mitzvah for them to do so. But I would hope that I will never fulfill that mitzvah. So here we get some interesting. This is where we get into some interesting waters here. Whether for situational reasons or whether for just laziness reasons, because the soul didn't fulfill its mission the way it should have, right? Let's call it sinning, to recuperate and to complete the mission of that soul in this world, it needs to come back. Now, there are three parts to that mission. Part number one is doing all 613 mitzvahs, okay? And as a result, sometimes a soul will come back in order to finish doing those mitzvah, particularly ones that it wasn't even possible for it to do. So it's not always necessarily making up for past misdoings, okay? But before we talk about these all as a whole, let's talk about number two, okay? So text 4, Steve, can I ask you to read for us, please? Text 4 is on page 178. The second purpose, the second mission of a soul in this world. Number one is to do all 613 mitzvot. Number two.
Okay, you should also realize that each individual must study all 4 of the Torah's layers, which are referred to by their acronym Pardes, orchard. These are Peshat, Remez, Darush, and Sod.
Okay.
Literal, illusion, exegenic, and mystical. Exegenic, excuse me. It is necessary for a soul to be reincarnated repeatedly until it completes them all.
Okay, so things are starting to get more exciting. So the other purpose, the other mission for which a soul comes into this world, so let's pull this up again. Okay, so there are 3 parts to the soul's mission. But all 3 of those parts fall under the same umbrella, which is we are here in this world as human beings in order to reveal God's presence here in the world. The way we do that is by fulfilling all 613 mitzvot. And as a result of doing those mitzvot, what happens is that we actually refine our body and our soul by fulfilling the purpose for which they came into this world. So we elevate them and we bring them up to that status. Okay, now this is done in 3 ways. Number one was the mitzvot, and reincarnation allows a soul to come back and do those other mitzvot. But there are also, in Torah study, which is another part of the way that we, elevate our souls and fulfill this mission of bringing godliness into the world, there are also multiple parts to studying Torah. We're going to start with 4, but we're going to see how that's going to start to divide. But let's start with these 4, okay? It's important for every single soul, so 600,000 souls in total, to study every part of the Torah on each of these 4 levels. Is your head starting to spin yet? And these four levels of the Torah can be they are vastly different, and depending on which generation that soul falls into, which body that soul falls into, which gender that soul falls into, which yeshiva or study predicament or scenario that soul ends up going to, it may or may not advance that cause a little further. Okay, so let's start with a little I know a lot of you are thinking, what are these 4 levels of the Torah? I never heard of this. Let's start with that. Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod. What they're translating as literal, allusion, exegetic, and mystical. Okay? Let's talk about what those 4 levels of the Torah are, and then we'll talk about how a soul may or may not experience them when it comes down here to this world. So let me just share this with the sound. And this video really does a phenomenal job. I love this video because it gets it down to the point.
Human authors express themselves in their works, both directly and subtly, sometimes intentionally and always subconsciously. When we read a text, we can choose either to read the lines or to engage in more intricate analysis and read between the lines. The divine author of the Torah did something similar, but to an infinitely greater degree. God expressed himself in the text in multiple ways all at once, directly as well as subtly, with plenty of insinuation and a vast hidden layer of the divine subconscious. And he then instructed us to excavate it all. Jewish tradition separates these layers of understanding into 4 categories. The first is pshat, direct intention, which is derived by examining context and syntax. For example, the Torah begins with the words, Bereshis bara Elokim, es hashemayim, ve'es haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. On the plainest level of Torah understanding, this is a straightforward statement of what happened at the beginning of time. But the simple meaning is not always easy to clarify. Many biblical commentators, most notably Rabbi Shlomo Yitzhaki, the 11th century French scholar known universally as Rashi, devoted their efforts to clarifying the straightforward meaning of the often mysterious biblical texts. Our second layer of understanding is remez, allusion. This refers to subtle communications that are encoded in the text. They can be uncovered using methods such as the numerical values of the Hebrew letters, the acronyms of words and phrases, or unusually sized letters in the Torah scroll. For example, the Torah's first 2 words, Bereshis bara, in the beginning, God created, carry the numerical value of 1116. That's the identical value of the phrase Barosh Hashanah Nivra. It was created on Rosh Hashanah. We are thereby informed that Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of creation. Our third layer of understanding is drush, interpretive. Our sages extrapolate a vast corpus of ideas and instruction from the Torah's text through methods such as textual comparison, sequencing analysis, and homiletical interpretation. For example, from a sequencing perspective, the Torah begins with the wrong beginning. It describes creation, a narrative that is seemingly secondary to the Torah's primary function as a book of guidance that tells us how God expects us to act on a daily basis. The Torah should have dived directly into the nitty-gritty of the laws. On the interpretive level, however, the Torah first describes creation to tackle a major hurdle to Torah observance. The majority of Torah laws rely on the Jewish nation owning and settling the land of Israel. We were instructed to conquer the land and never relinquish our claim of ownership over it. But such a radical claim to a territory is bound to provoke opposition. Who gives us the right to take possession of a land and claim it as our eternal heritage? The Torah, therefore, begins with creation, clarifying that God is the creator of all territories, and he has the right to permanently bequeath a specific parcel to a particular people. It then records the history of God doing precisely that with the Jewish people. With this switch in sequence, the Torah supplies the Jews with the response God expects them to provide all who accuse them of land theft and occupation. The fourth layer of understanding is sod, hidden meaning. This refers to the deeply mystical messages that float behind every phrase and letter in the Torah. For example, the word bereshis can be split perfectly into 2 words, bara, shis, meaning He created 6. God first formed the 6 emotive divine attributes from chesed, kindness, through yesod, attachment, as described in Jewish mysticism. God then used these 6 attributes to create the actual universe. So there you have a sampling of the 4 layers of understanding that can be found in the Torah's very first words. Beyond this, a vast ocean of knowledge is contained in these same words. And beyond that stretches the infinite vastness of wisdom contained in the rest of the Torah's close to 80,000 words.
Now, many of you are not surprised by this. You may have heard of different levels that there are in the Torah. You may have heard, or you may have even imagined that the Torah is God's wisdom. So obviously it's very, very deep. Okay. But here's where we're getting. We're talking about reincarnation. The purpose of reincarnation is to say, listen, there's a soul here, right? We're trying to answer the question of why. Why would reincarnation be a thing? There's a soul here whose mission, like every other soul in this world, is to radiate godliness here in this world. Now, in order for that soul to reach its perfection, so to speak, or to finish its mission, it needs to do all 613 mitzvahs, and it needs to experience the Torah on all 4 levels that we just mentioned, Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod. It's okay if you can't repeat the whole video for me, and I do encourage you to watch it again. I'm going to send out a link after the class, but it was just meant to illustrate a purpose that even in one verse, that was the opening verse of the Torah, we find 4 different ways of looking at it. Now, if this doesn't have your head spinning yet, it's not that each of us has to find a portion of the Torah. Okay, so me, Carol Grant, and Yehuda Masedi, each of us is going to learn the Torah tonight, and we're going to find 4 different ways of associating with it. Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod. Great, I'm done. No. In every part of the Torah, there are 600,000 versions of how to study that word and that verse on the layer of Pshat, on the first level. Then there are 600,000 ways of doing it on the layer of Drush, of Remez. Then 600,000 of Drush, and then 600,000 of the layer of Sod. Okay? And therefore, every single soul that comes down into this world, at some point over the reincarnations, this is where we're getting to it, has to experience every part of the Torah on all 4 levels. Are you dizzy yet? Okay. In addition to fulfilling all 613 mitzvot. Now, I see a few people here that attend Minyan, that come in the mornings to davening every single morning. You'll be familiar with the fact that no matter which shul you go to, they start, sometimes they sing it, sometimes they don't sing it. But before Hodu, before they even begin prayers, they sing a prayer called Sheyibane Beit Hamikdash B'mheira V'yameinu V'ten Chalkeinu B'Toratecha. May God rebuild the temple, etc. Okay? Now, this is a very interesting prayer, and I want to call attention to a specific word. So we'll call on one of the minyaneers. Mickey, can I ask you to read for us, please? Text 5a.
Okay, praying for our portion.
Yeah, go ahead.
May it be your will, our God and God of our fathers, that the holy temple be rebuilt speedily in our days, and grant us our portion in your Torah.
We ask for this every single morning. Grant us our portion in your Torah. I don't get, what do you mean my portion? It's God's Torah. Right? The whole Torah is God's, right? So what do you mean my portion? There's a layer of understanding, okay? And perhaps to further clarify this, it helps right now to remind everybody of what a soul really is. A soul is a spark of God, right? A soul, we are really expressions of godliness. So there is a layer of the Torah, which is God's wisdom, that specifically correlates to our soul of the 600,000, and therefore every single part of the Torah has 4 layers that only our soul can uncover on that layer. Okay? Now, I can't speak for anybody here, okay? But I'm going to speak for myself, and I think it's pretty good to speak for myself, because most of you are familiar with the fact that I teach Torah for a living, all right? And I think I can comfortably say that so far in the 30 years that I've been alive, in the 5, 6, 7 years that I've been teaching Torah almost the entire day, every single day, I do not believe that I've uncovered my portion of the Torah on all 4 layers of every single part of the Torah, and I'm just one soul of 600,000. So I needed a lot of previous reincarnations, right? Now, then you have people who have other jobs, right? Rightfully so, right? So they're certainly not doing that. Now, and that's not a fault. That's not a fault. It's just the way of the world. And the same thing with mitzvahs. You know what I mean? I probably will not give as much tzedakah as many of the people on this group who have certain jobs and put themselves in certain positions where they can do tzedakah. And never mind the fact that every single one of you, your job and your specific life scenario puts you in a position to do certain mitzvahs. And that's the beauty of this whole system, that every soul, as it comes down into the world over and over again, and I recognize there's still some confusion about that. We're going to talk about it. We're still tackling the why. As it comes down over and over again, it slowly fulfills that entire mission. And the end of that mission, of course, is Mashiach, right? Because if all of those souls have done all of those mitzvahs, and all of those souls have studied the Torah on all 4 of those levels, so then we've successfully radiated godliness. We've successfully revealed godliness into the world. Okay? The Rebbe clarifies this a little bit more in text 5b. Marilyn, can I ask you to read for us, please?
The universe is waiting for you. As explained in numerous sources, the soul of each Jew has a specific segment of the Torah with which it is particularly associated. This explains the phrasing of our sage's statement, "Grant us our portion of your Torah." Our portion implies that each of us has a unique portion within the Torah. This concept is further expressed in our sage's statement that there are novel Torah concepts that an accomplished student of the Torah is destined to introduce. In other words, the entire universe anticipates the birth of this particular diligent student, awaiting the moment that the student innovates, meaning uncovers this specific concept within the Torah. For this concept is this student's portion in the Torah.
Okay, so we have 600, thank you, Marilyn. So we have 600,000 root souls. Every single one of them has to not only study all 4 dimensions of the Torah, but every one of those souls also has to uncover its portion on each layer, on each one of those 4 layers in the entire Torah. Okay, now, this brings us, hold on, we had done that earlier, sorry about that. This brings us to figure 5.1, okay? So you can either follow on page 181 or you can follow on the screen in front of you. We now have 3 ways that every single one of us, or a 3-pronged mission that every single one of us has, which obviously all fall under the umbrella of radiating godliness and revealing godliness in this world, that our mission unfolds in this world. And that is, number 1, to complete all 613 mitzvot. Number 2, to study the Torah using all 4 layers of the Torah, generally speaking. And number 3, to then reveal our portion in the Torah on all 4 layers. Okay. So far, so good. But now the big question is how? Because, and by how I mean, how does reincarnation work? The reason why it's so important now to answer how is because there's a lot of questions, probably the biggest one floating around by everybody, which is, so hold on, you're saying my soul, the one that I kind of consider my identity, and the one that sometimes I talk about it like, and I say statements like, I cried my soul out, or I loved him with all my soul, or I did this mitzvah with all my soul. That soul is kind of like it's like it gets reincarnated every single couple of years, and it's not really my soul. It's kind of just the one that I'm borrowing right now. More like, I don't know, like a book you take out of the library. It's mine for now, but it'll be somebody else's soon, right? That should be very disturbing to many of you, just emotionally, but also based on everything we've studied till now. That should be very, very difficult to wrap your brain around. And so that's actually not the way it works. And not only is that not the way it works, Rabbi Chaim Vital, back to that book called the Shara Gilgulim, the Gate of Reincarnation, he makes sure to clarify for us that that's not the way it works. Elise, if I can ask you to read for us, please, text 6. Just don't forget to unmute yourself, Elise, please.
Okay, we're now on
page 182.
Okay, although we've stated in numerous passages of this treatise, that's one word I can't pronounce, treatise.
Go ahead.
Okay, that a specific individual soul was reincarnated in a particular person, and it was subsequently reincarnated in another specific individual, and so on. Do not misread this as implying that the original soul itself is reincarnated repeatedly. Rather, each human soul branches out into innumerable roots. Every root contains an infinite quantity of soul sparks. With each subsequent reincarnation, a number of these sparks are rectified, and they ascend to enjoy the rewards of heaven and dwell in the particular strata of Gan Eden that are appropriate for them. However, those soul sparks that were not rectified are reincarnated to provide further opportunity for rectification.
Okay. Let's unpack this. Many of you are probably tempted to say there's a number to how many sparks each soul has. Okay, so where are we now? We have 600,000 root souls, and then each soul is divided into many sparks. Now, many of you are probably tempted to say that number is 613. It's not. Let me remind you why, for a few reasons. First of all, beyond the 613 mitzvot, there are also the sparks that are related with certain sections of the Torah, right? So it's actually many more. Here, he actually uses the number infinite quantity of soul sparks, okay? But at least for right now, let's talk about the 613 of them that are corresponding to the mitzvot, okay? So every single one of us, our root soul, which means the soul that we have inside of us is an iteration, so to speak, of the root soul, one of those 600,000. Our root soul has 613 sparks, each one corresponding to another mitzvah. One corresponds to putting on tefillin. One corresponds to lighting Shabbat candles. One corresponds to, every mitzvah there's, keeping Shabbos, etc. Now, what happens is that before the soul that comes down into our body specifically, one of those 600,000 comes down, it kind of, let's look at it like DNA. It's really the only way that I can think of to use for it. The root of it is all the same, but then it kind of evolves and it reforms until it forms the specific DNA, spiritual DNA of this particular soul. Okay. Now that might be only 6 sparks corresponding, let's say, to tefillin, Shabbat, making blessings, whatever. Choose 6 mitzvot. And that becomes the most important mitzvot for that soul to do here in this world. Okay? So then this person goes through his life and lives his life. And he may have had less sparks, more sparks, we don't know. Right? Again, remember that it's many more than 613 because you've got all the ones that are corresponding to the sections in the Torah that we're studying. And then by the end of his life, all the souls that there are, all the sparks that there are in his root soul are divided now into 2 categories. Either rectified sparks, which means these are specific sparks of that soul that were supposed to express their purpose and now were expressed because this person came down into this world and expressed, let's say, tefillin, put on tefillin every single day and made it his mitzvah. So now that spark is done for this soul. It was properly observed and it's been rectified. But there are many sparks left over that were not rectified. Okay, and that can be in both categories. Either it can be a positive mitzvah that this root soul still needs to take care of properly, or it could be, and this is where we get to previous iterations affecting current iterations, could be in a previous iteration of life, at some point, one of the souls transgressed a certain mitzvah. In other words, did a don't, Or even more so, it could be it never happened beforehand, but you specifically were put down in this world in order to rectify a don't spark, okay? Stay with me, please. This spark means that you're going to be faced with a challenge, and this particular challenge is going to be your challenge in life. And that's because your soul is supposed to ace this particular challenge. So let's say non-kosher. It may be that it's your soul's specific mission to avoid eating non-kosher food. And keeping Shabbos is actually not the main focus of your soul. And we're going to talk about that soon. And if your soul does that, then that has rectified that spark of that mitzvah, even though it's a don't mitzvah. Okay, does that make sense? And that's how it works with the don'ts. Now, if a spark is refined, it then goes back up to its root source and becomes back part of the soul. The other sparks still need to be worked on. Yes, Esther Kornfeld, go ahead. We'll stop for some questions.
I actually have two questions that are combined.
If only two, you're better than me already.
First, I want to say I changed my answer to question 6 that you asked me at the beginning.
Okay.
So, incarcerated as a penalty for sins committed in prior life. Yes, but my question A is, in that context, is a non-fulfillment of a mitzvah or a Torah violation considered a sin in this context? So then it's definitely a yes to question number 6.
Okay, so let's leave question number 6 aside for a second. We're going to get back to it at the end of the lesson. Okay,
Right.
I recognize that all of those answers by a lot of people are shifting as we go through the lesson, and they did for me as well while I was preparing this, by the way. I will say that this is not something they teach you in yeshiva as you're getting ready to be a rabbi, like you better know how reincarnation works. You know, you never know. It'll come in handy. It's not exactly that. I found it fascinating to explore this topic.
Do you understand what I mean?
I absolutely understand what you mean.
And the other thing, just as a side note,
Okay, go ahead.
I understood a mitzvah, the best mitzvot are done without expectations to get anything back. Now I'm hearing almost like, do as much as you can to fulfill and do. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. One second. We're going to get to that. Esther, can I ask you a question, though? Both
Sure.
your questions are kind of based on a different question, which I didn't hear you ask yet.
Okay.
Maybe you're just afraid to. Why didn't you ask me, how do I know which mitzvot are my soul's special ones that I'm supposed to be doing?
Yeah, you just said that. I was wondering
considered that.
a minute ago, but I thought you would get to that.
No, I will. So that is the answer. The answer is I will get to it. And it's in just a couple texts, but that's going to affect what you're talking about. Okay. So just because we're saying that this soul is here in this world because it needs to specifically make sure it puts on tefillin every day, this doesn't mean it now gets to desecrate Shabbat. Even if it necessarily, let's say it even specifically knew which mitzvah it was, that doesn't mean it gets to go now and desecrate Shabbat. Those mitzvahs still are mitzvot, and they're extremely valuable, and they make this world an extremely better place by bringing godliness and revealing godliness. It's just, meaning this isn't the be-all, end-all of Judaism. Just because we say that part of the world happening here is that all of these souls need to do all these mitzvot, that's not what we're supposed to be thinking about when we do a mitzvah.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is because that's not why we're doing the mitzvah.
Exactly.
You will notice that a lot of the information I'm saying to you now is new, okay? But if I start to talk to you about Mashiach, or if I start to talk to you about reward and punishment, or I start to talk about any of the 13, or believing in God for that matter, or any of the 13 principles of faith of Judaism, usually you've heard a lot of information about them. The reason for that is because this is not one of the fundamentals of Judaism. Reincarnation is a fascinating topic, but you can be a very good Jew and go through your entire life and not be aware of it at all. It's not important for you to know about it. The biggest impact it's going to have on your life, we're going to talk about all of it at the end of the class. Okay? And it's not necessary. It's not a requirement to know this information in order to live as a good Jew. So That's not supposed to be our focus at all when we're doing our mitzvah, to think about all these reincarnations, the fact that we're fixing or completing our soul or what have you. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, contradictory of doing mitzvah also.
Come again?
It would be a contradiction as to what I've been understanding about mitzvah. Do it out of, you know.
Do it for God. Do it for God. Do it to make this.
If you know, you can never receive anything back from it.
100%. Yes, and many other aspects of mitzvah besides. Okay, to say that the only reason we do mitzvah in this world is in order to somehow complete our soul because of previous reincarnations or because of what this soul needs to do, would be limiting the mitzvah that we do. That's not the reason we do mitzvah. Okay, thank you for bringing up those points. That I think I'm sure that helped clarify for a lot of people. Although it looks like it also brought up some more questions. Mickey, why don't we jump to you? Go for it.
Okay, a couple of questions. First one, what constitutes the completion of the soul's mission in fulfilling a mitzvah? Because many of these mitzvahs you do repeatedly, but you may miss periodically doing them, say keeping Shabbat or lighting candles or whatever the mitzvah is. What constitutes the fulfillment of the mission?
Okay.
Good question. It's not just doing it once, obviously.
Good question. Right? I think the answer to this is one of those I don't knows. And I don't think it's an I don't know as in Zushi doesn't know. I think it's an I don't know as in Jewish literature doesn't tell us. And I don't think we're supposed to know. It basically means elevating that spark. When that spark is elevated, we don't know. Okay, but by way of example, let me share a story with you. Okay, the Apta Rav, who some of you may have heard of, Rabbi, I forgot his first, Heschel, Yoshua Heschel maybe, of Apt, lived about 300 years ago, maybe 200 years ago. They used to call him the Ohev Yisrael, okay, the lover of Jews. He definitely, there's no person that will tell you that he didn't specialize in the mitzvah of loving fellow Jews. Now, he was a very, very big tzaddik, a very righteous person, and now it's not time to get into his whole historical biography. But I will share with you a very interesting story, okay? And this falls under this category of just extra fun information, which I'm happy to share, and there's lots of them that we can share, of different people who we do know who was reincarnated from whom. Nobody on this Zoom knows who they were reincarnated from, but every once in a while we get like a little piece of the Gemara or a little, piece of Jewish history that says this person knew that he was reincarnated from that person. And the Apta Rav was one of them. Okay, so here's how the story goes. On Yom Kippur, during the prayers, there's a part of the prayer when we're going through the service that they did in the temple, that the high priest did in the temple, when the temple was still standing on Yom Kippur. And we say this line, which is V'kach hayamon or V'kach hayaomer. So he would say, so he would count. All right, when we're talking about what the Kohen Gadol would do. Now, those that daven in the Apta Rav, because he had a lot of people who tried to hang around him. He was a very big tzaddik, and they wanted to rub off on them. They would often hear him praying on Yom Kippur, and he would say V'kach hayiti omer. So I used to say, or so I used to count. And they asked him, what's this all about? And he said, listen, I know that my soul was, he was in tune with his soul to such a degree. He knew that his soul was reincarnated 10 times. And he went through them, once as a high priest, once as a king, once as a Nasi, which is like a leader of the Jewish people, different eras in Jewish history. And he says, it happens to be that the high priest era, I have this very conscious awareness of. And so when I say it, that's the way I relate to it. Okay, now, here's the kicker, and here's what I'm getting to, Mickey, to your point. Okay, high priest was a very holy person, no matter which high priest it was. A king, okay, there were some and some, you know what I mean? Like the Ohev Yisrael, remember he was called the lover of Jews? He said the reason he was here in this world is because never in any of those iterations was the mitzvah of loving your fellow Jew as yourself ever fulfilled to its perfection yet for his soul. And that's why that was the mitzvah that he really put his whole life into. Okay? Now, to think about it for a second, I'm sure that high priest, whichever one it was that he was a reincarnation of, loved many Jews. But whatever degree of perfection or whatever aha moment they were waiting for, heaven, God, whatever it is, wasn't fulfilled yet. And it was fulfilled in his lifetime. Does that answer your question a little bit, Mickey? So
yeah, we don't know.
Yeah, that's how I started answering the question. I said I think the answer is I don't know, but I think this helps to shed a little light. In other words,
Right.
it's
No, it
not
does.
necessarily doing it once or twice, and it's not. I guess it's kind of making a life out of it, making.
Yeah. So, yeah. The other question, well, it's just
Right.
maybe more a comment or observation. I mean, we spent last week talking about the journey of the soul after death up to the 12 months of kind of getting cleansed and purified, right? To be like
Yes.
a pure spark again. So it gets to the pure spark, but only to come back down again and kind of have to kind of work on the.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit more about this point. The mistake you're making is still the mistake in text 6, okay? Which is we still have this notion of the fact that it's all the same soul that's coming down again, okay? So I actually want to elaborate more on this. I'm going to use this as a segue, if you don't mind, Mickey, even if it goes beyond your question. Souls are not the same. Even if Mickey is a direct reincarnation of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, your soul is not Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's soul. That's not how it works. Remember, there's a root soul that stays up in heaven. And then from that soul, some of those sparks form this new identity, and to that is attached, and I think this is very crucial, to that is attached a new personality, a new consciousness, new intellect, new emotional identity, etc. All of those things are brand new. The personality, let's call it, of the soul are brand new for every single iteration of the soul as it comes down here. So reincarnation to be thought of as just, here's a great analogy, okay? Here's a good analogy. Some of you are thinking, even if you're not using these words, of, and this way I thought of it before I studied this stuff for the first time. We use this kind of imagery as if a soul is kind of like a hard drive, a hard drive for a computer, and that's where all the information is stored. And of course, any hard drive, we all know, you can, if the computer screen, let's say, breaks, you take it out and you install it in a new computer, and boom, you got all the same information on a new computer, even though the old computer was red and this one is green, or the old computer had a very low resolution and this one has a very high resolution, or the old computer worked very slow and this one works very quickly, right? But the hard drive is still the same. I would venture to say it's much more, that's not how souls work. It's not the same personality with the memory and with everything that soul experience, just take it and put it into a new one. I would say it's much more like taking the battery from one computer and putting it in a new one. It's a brand new computer. It just happens to be powered by the same source of energy as the old one was. Okay? Now, it's obviously not a perfect analogy because it's not just that it happens to be powered. There's a very strong spiritual connection there, but it's not the same personality. Okay, this is where all those sparks, that each root soul is made up of all these different sparks, and our soul, let's talk about mine or Mickey's, is made up of a few of those sparks that kind of form a new identity, and that then a personality is attached to and comes down and animates our body. Mickey, did that answer your question a little bit?
It helps.
It helps. Okay. All right. Don't worry. It doesn't answer all my questions either. You're not alone. Now, just because this is so much fun, we're going to keep going. All right. There are some even more fantastical, for lack of a better word, ways of reincarnation. So the way that we just discussed is the standard way of reincarnation. And actually this form of reincarnation happens to every single person. I think it's safe to assume that every single person on this Zoom, with the exception of, very few people, every single person, every single Jew that's living right now is a reincarnation of a soul. It's a new iteration, a new version of that same soul, okay? And this, by the way, should help us with another very common question. I'll just use this as an opportunity to answer another big question that people have when it comes to reincarnation, because people think about Techiyat HaMetim, which means the resurrection of the dead. When all the souls come back, and they're all going to come back in bodies, what's going on? If it's the same soul that was just reincarnated twice, how does it come back and go into two separate bodies, right? But it's not. It's two different souls, or two different branches off or offshoots of that root soul. And each one of them will come back into its body and continue to function here. Which is why we say that the mitzvot that we do now with our soul affects so much of what our soul experiences when Mashiach comes, which is a whole different topic. Now, this is the standard version of reincarnation. Okay, but now let's get into some more exciting ones. All right. The second form of reincarnation, and this is kind of, you could call it partial reincarnation, is what we're going to call soul impregnation. Okay. In other words, a pregnant soul. I'm going to start with text 7a. Esther Necha, if I can please ask you to read. So we're on page 183, soul impregnation. Go ahead.
The concept of Gilgud, reincarnation, is that a soul requiring further rectification enters the body of a child as it emerges from its mother's womb to serve as the newborn soul. It has no permission to leave that individual until that person's destined day of death. By contrast, the concept of Ibor, soul impregnation, is that a soul enters an adult body that is already inhabited by a soul the person's primary soul received at birth. In this case, the individual is merely impregnated with a guest soul in addition to harboring a primary soul. The individual then carries the extra soul, much as a woman carries a child in her womb.
All right. Some very, very exciting stuff.
Now, what weren't the spies impregnated with the souls of the tribes, the sons of Yaakov, before they went off on?
That sounds like it makes sense. I don't know if they were impregnated or if they were actual reincarnations. They were definitely the leaders of each of the tribes, but I never heard anything to the effect of what you're talking about. But that doesn't mean anything. There are so many examples of reincarnation that are dotted throughout the Torah. Like I said, that's a lot of fun to talk about. We're trying to get the general idea. And then if we have time, I do want to go through some of the exciting ones, but some of them is like really goes through like traverses history, and we could talk about that. So there's this idea, right? So imagine a woman, she's only one person. And then when she becomes pregnant, she's got this other person that's on her. And for those women that have been pregnant, you're very well aware of this, that you have this other life that you're carrying with you as you go along. So similarly, this can happen to souls, and that's why we use the word impregnation, that a soul can get another soul for a temporary period of its life. Why is this happening? Why does this happen? Shlomo, can I ask you to read for us, please? Text 7b. There are two reasons why it can happen that a soul would get impregnated with another soul. Shlomo seems like he's not here. So Ron, if I can ask you please to read for us. Oh, Shlomo, go ahead.
Let's see.
Text 7b, we're on page 184. The
7B.
two reasons why a soul would be impregnated with another soul for a brief period of its life.
A soul experiences Ibur for one of two reasons. The impregnated soul comes to an individual for its own sake. In its previous life, it failed to perform a particular mitzvah and was therefore left lacking. This was the kind of mitzvah that was impossible to perform under the conditions of that lifetime, such as the mitzvah of Yibum, Chalitza, and the like. It is therefore not obligated to engage in a full-scale incarnation described earlier in this treatise, for the soul impregnation is sufficient. The impregnated soul comes solely to assist an individual, to bring a person additional merit, or to guide an individual in the matters of Torah and mitzvahs. In this case, the impregnated soul lacks nothing for itself.
Okay, thank you, Shlomo. So if a soul is reincarnated with full reincarnation, the reason that would be is because there's something massively missing in this soul that it now needs to get reincarnated in order to fully finish, to do this. This needs to be done for this soul. But then there's other reasons, and I guess we can cough that up to it's got to do it at one point. Certain times it's got to do it. And if it was lazy in one lifetime, the next lifetime, it's got to be done. But then there are some times that it's, nobody asked me about the mitzvahs that are very, very uncommon. So let's take, for example, the mitzvah of Yibum or Chalitza, right? So for those of you that are not familiar, if a man dies young and he doesn't have any children, the woman has to marry his brother, right? And that's called Yibum. And if she doesn't want to marry him, then they do Chalitza, which is the whole story with the shoe and the untying the shoe and the spitting, You may have heard of these things. These are very uncommon mitzvahs. Number one, because of this, the things that need to happen in order for the mitzvah to the scenario for the mitzvah to play out. But number two, because then there are other options of what can be done. So and then the person actually needs to do that mitzvah. So it's very possible that every iteration of a particular soul is doing amazing as it goes along. And yet it's just not having the opportunity to do that mitzvah, right? So there are some easier questions to answer. Like, I don't get it. None of us here are ever going to sacrifice an animal on an altar because we don't live in the times of the temple. Yes, but our souls in previous iterations at some point did have a time when that version of our soul or that incarnation of our soul did live during the temple times, and then it took care of that. And that's not our job. Our job is to do something else, to live at a time when there are iPhones and whatever, all sorts of other things, and do whatever it is that we need to do now. So that's a much easier answer question. But then there are some mitzvahs that by their very definition are very, very rare. Okay, so that is reason number one, that a soul might come down as an impregnated soul and attach itself to another soul and experience something together with it. So it might come down just for the time of that mitzvah, do that mitzvah together with a live person, and then move on. Okay, then go back up above. But it could also be the opposite. Okay, and this, by the way, for those of you that study Tanya, and I know many of you have, in chapter 14 of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe talks about number two, reason number two here, B, which is that sometimes it's to our benefit, okay? So if we can actually connect to Hashem on such a high level, but because maybe we're just not spiritually equipped, or the scenarios of our lifetime don't allow us to actually transcend ourselves and connect to God at the ultimate superior level, sometimes we get this amazing benefit of a soul coming down, the soul of a tzaddik, and taking us along for the ride. Okay, so let me paint the scenario here for you. Carol Grant is sitting on one Shabbat morning, and she's praying. She's praying with a lot of fervor, and she's meditating, and she's really trying to do her best. Now, the problem is that Carol Grant lives in a certain type of scenario. She might not be equipped to literally connect to God at the highest level, but she's doing the best she can right now. Okay, so I'm going to use an example which to me would be like literally, the highest of highs. Imagine if the Rebbe, right, was a tremendous tzaddik on a very high level. His soul came down and attached itself to Carol Grant because she did the best that she was able to do, but because for things outside of her control, she cannot reach a certain high level. The Rebbe's soul came and attached itself to her during that davening, and then propelled her to be able to connect to God on a much higher level than she ever would have been able to on her own. This is a tremendous benefit to Carol, right, or to anyone else for that matter, right? And that is a tremendous benefit to the host soul, let's call it, which gets this other soul via impregnation for this brief period of time, and it kind of gives it this rocket boost, if that makes any sense. So that's two reasons why there might be partial reincarnation. It's a temporary guest soul, either for the guest soul's sake or to assist the host soul. I don't know what happened there. Okay. Now, something is strange here. Okay. Now let's move on to another form of reincarnation, another fun one, which is non-human reincarnation. Something a lot of people have a question on. And before we get there, in order to segue right into that, we're going to start with, so how often does this go on? Let's say a particular number of sparks come down, it tries to do, and they're supposed to focus on the mitzvah of tefillin, and that soul doesn't focus on the mitzvah of tefillin. All right, it goes up, comes back down again a couple generations later because it's still got to focus on that. Still doesn't do it. Maybe because it's lazy, maybe because it didn't come, whatever it is, right? And this keeps happening. How often does this go on? How many iterations of reincarnation can there be? Who are we holding here? Steve, can I ask you to read for us, please? Text 8. Page 185.
Okay. When a human soul comes to the world and becomes soiled by sin in the process, it reincarnates in another body to rectify itself. That second life is its first reincarnation. If it fails to rectify itself during that lifetime, it may return a second reincarnation. If it again fails to find rectification, it may endure a third reincarnation. After that, however, it is no longer provided opportunities for rectification via reincarnation. That's a tongue twister.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so hold on a second. Just to clarify, a soul can be reincarnated many, many times, but that's not the reincarnation to correct a past misdeed. That's because it's exploring different parts of its identity and fulfilling its mission slowly. That may have happened 50 times in that soul, in that root soul's experience. But then there's this other reason that reincarnation happens, which, like we said, which is to rectify past misdeeds. That has a maximum of 4 times, or 3 in reincarnations. The first time, and then 3 reincarnations subsequently. And what happens if that's the case? So he said that it can't reincarnate anymore, right? So I don't get it. Can it not rectify any past misdeeds? The answer is no. And this, meaning the answer is yes, it can rectify them. And this is where we get to non-human reincarnation. Joanne, can I ask you to read for us text 9, please? Joanne, you're very low, meaning you're unmuted, but for some reason we hear you very low. I don't know why. Go ahead. Oh, there you go. That's much better.
Behold, God does all these twice or thrice with man. It's from Job. The limitation of twice or thrice applies with man, meaning that a human soul is not subsequently reincarnated in a human body. Rather, it is forced to wander the planet until it is reincarnated in an inanimate, vegetative, or animal entity. Then, after it has done its penance, there is hope for its future, for God's endless mercies extend to all of his creations.
Thank you, Joanne. And so that is why you may have heard that it's kind of a form of punishment. It's not exactly a beautiful thing, even though some of us dog owners might like to think, oh, my dog is reincarnated with a soul. And it could be. And could be that that's why it has a very specific identity, etc. But it's not a beautiful thing. Souls should not be reincarnated in vegetative states or in animal states, etc. And if they are, it is a form of punishment, because it's really the soul 3 times, 3 strikes and you're out, and really 4 times. And now this is the only way to do it. So that's just a touch on that. Okay. And now to answer the big question. Okay, so Esther, I blamed this on you before, but really it's a question we really need to get to. And that is, so how do I know what mine is, right? Hopefully everybody's thinking that right around now, right? Like, wouldn't it be amazing to know
that I don't have to eat matzah on Pesach and can continue to eat bread?
I was going to suggest that I need to focus on certain things, like let's say eating matzah or whatever it is. You know, my birthday is Pesach, Esther. Could be this is like my mitzvah, matzah. I don't know if my birthday shows anything.
Matzah.
What?
I was just joking. I love.
No. Of course, I'm. Don't worry about it. I'm not offended in any way. But I will say like this. I will say like this. There's not going to be an answer. There is no way for us to know, and it's on purpose that we don't know. And we'll talk in a minute why we don't know, why it's important for us not to know. But we do get kind of clues along the way, and that's what I think you guys will find very, very fascinating. Russell, are you up to reading for us? Text 10. Russell, you with us? I don't know if he's there. All right. So Barbie, we'll call on you. Text 10, page 187, when you're ready. Just don't forget to unmute. Barbie Wiseman? Oh, sorry. Maybe she didn't hear me the first time. Can we ask you to read for us text 10? Go ahead.
Okay. It is impossible to deduce or intuit whether one possesses a reincarnated soul or not, unless one is the recipient of a mystical communication in this regard. You may wonder, how then will we know the purpose for which we entered this world, which mitzvah we must scrupulously perform, or which transgression we must especially avoid? The answers are naturally ingrained in us. We experience natural affinity and longing to perform a certain mitzvah when that mitzvah is critical to our present incarnation. Or, just a minute.
You got it?
I got it. Or our inclination strives especially hard to entice us to commit a particular sin, for it is the very same sin in which we blundered during our previous life. Oh, so we've redeemed ourselves finally. Huh?
Right.
Right?
Here's where we're getting, okay? And I know we're going a little bit over time here, and I hope that's okay. Some of these points were a little difficult to explain and bring across, etc. Here's where we're getting. It's impossible for us to know. It's impossible for us to know which one, which direction specifically. And soon we'll talk about why it's important that we don't know who, so some people want to know who they were reincarnated from, right? That's also not a good thing. But we do experience a certain pull, a certain drive in a certain direction, okay? Now, sometimes that's to the positive, and that I think then it's a little more obvious. Some people, for some reason, they come into this world and they're like driven by tzedakah. I have friends that told me from day one, I am not going to open a Chabad. And they were like really driven people. And they really want to do the best they can here in this world. They said, I'm not going to open a Chabad. I don't want to do that. I'm going to go into business. I'm going to make millions of dollars. And I am going to support like 30, 50 Chabad houses. And some of these people even support what we do here in Pasadena a little bit. People at Crown Heights. You know what I mean? I was blown away. He reached out to me. This friend of mine who told me this 10 years ago, he reached out to me now in response to my Purim email about what the 4 mitzvahs are of Purim. And he asked me, so where's the donate button? So I said, every email has to have a donate button. I was always taught, when you're fundraising, but then you can also just serve people. You don't have to always be fundraising. People don't like to always hear that you, right? So he tells me, all right, well, you have my card on file, charge it $1,800. I was blown away. I was like, I ask people sometimes for $1,800, they give me $180, right? This is part of my job. It's fine. It's part of it. But here he reaches out, and this is because this is his passion. I know that I'm not the only one he did that to. He does this to so many Chabad houses. Now, there's not so many of these kind of people. There are few and far between, etc. But I'm just saying he's clearly chosen to make his life mission about tzedakah. Now, that's somebody, and I'm sure many of you feel this way about certain mitzvahs. For some reason, this mitzvah always spoke to you a lot, and you get very involved in it, and you get very excited about it, etc. But, and here comes the uncomfortable part. All right, don't log off now. You can't log off by the uncomfortable part. It works the other way too. How many times have you thought to yourself, why do I struggle so hard with this mitzvah? I know so many other people that don't. Whatever it is, whether it's getting along with your spouse, whether it's keeping Shabbos, whether it's whatever it is, going to the mikveh, anything. I'm choosing some of the more difficult mitzvahs, but sometimes it can be something very easy, like putting on tefillin. And some people, for them to put on tefillin every day, it's just very difficult. And I'm like, I don't get it. Like, it's just 5 minutes every day. What's the big deal? When we sometimes find that whether it's not to do something negative or to actually do something positive is a tremendous struggle for us, that's where, in Yiddish they say, that's where the whole thing lies. Everything is right there. Why? Because the reason that you feel such a pullback from it, and the reason why you feel such a struggle from it is because your soul is struggling against its own identity. And that's the whole purpose of why your soul came down here. The reason I say it's uncomfortable is because that's some pretty heavy pressure. So you're saying the things I struggle with most might be the whole reason why my soul came down into this world? Yes. And hopefully that doesn't just make us feel uncomfortable, it's also empowering. Because sometimes we feel like idiots. We're like, why is it so hard for me to put on tefillin every day? Like everybody else seems to have no problem doing it. Why do I have such a big problem doing it? Or whatever the example is. And the answer may be because this is your, and if so, then that's the most beautiful. It kind of resolves. It resolves a certain, understanding in our brains that really helps us move forward with that. And the reason I gave an example, some of you might have noticed, the first example I gave was getting along with your spouse, marriage. The reason I use that example is because in this very powerful letter of the Rebbe, that is the text 11, that is text 11 that's coming up, that is the point that Rebbe uses and addresses this specific point. Esther Necha, can we ask you to read it for us? You're already unmuted.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
I am replying to your letter in which you inform me that you accepted and are implementing my directives regarding Torah study classes and giving charity. But as far as situation at home is concerned, your marital harmony appears only superficially to have improved, while the underlying reality remains unsatisfactory. I already told you in my previous letters that it would be challenging. You are meant to find it difficult, but the success of your life's mission hinges upon your sincere efforts toward marital harmony. Our mystical teachings reveal that rare individuals are born with original souls. The rest of us are reincarnations. We return to complete the fulfillment of the mitzvot that we missed in previous lifetimes. Certainly, we are obligated in all of the mitzvot in every lifetime, but the specific mitzvot we omitted in earlier incarnations are critical to the rectification of our souls and the rectification of this world. Using the evil inclination as a guide, we can identify the mitzvot that determine the outcome of our life's mission. Our inclination opposes the mitzvot that we finalized in previous lifetimes, but only to the degree necessary to create free choice between good and evil. By contrast, it unleashes a fierce storm of opposition with countless hurdles and challenges when we approach a mitzvah that we failed to fulfill in previous incarnations. Therefore, your many hurdles to marital harmony reveal an indispensability to your rectification. Do whatever it takes to achieve harmony.
That's some powerful stuff, right? I mean, like the Rebbe, here's the Rebbe talking to someone, not going to say any words. I mean, very politely, as the Rebbe always does. He says, listen, I appreciate it. I recognize the struggle that you're in, but this might be the whole purpose for why your soul came down into this world. And this brings us to the meditation for this week, which I personally found very, very moving and very, very poignant. And here we go. Hold on, I didn't share it with the. Okay, perfect.
Today's reflection is going to help us try to relate to the idea that our souls came to the world this time around for a special purpose. A mitzvah, a good act that has special value in this lifetime. Now, how can we know such a thing? To a great extent, we can't. However, there's a way that we can catch a glimpse into what is important for the soul in this lifetime. And that is by way of a metaphor which we will now visualize. Picture in your mind's eye, you are leading an army out to battle. If the militaristic imagery is not to your liking, you can imagine a game of chess. The same idea applies. You're leading your army out to battle, and you begin to become aware that your opponent, your enemy, is focused on striking you in one particular spot. Now, it hadn't occurred to you that this spot has importance, but from the fact that the enemy keeps focusing on it, keeps going after it, we begin to realize that it must have strategic importance to the enemy. As you're imagining this, shift now and think about your life and think about a mitzvah or a good deed that is inordinately difficult for you. And by inordinately, what I mean is this. We all have mitzvahs that are harder and easier for all of us. But then there are mitzvahs that by all rights should be easy. It shouldn't be so challenging, and for some inexplicable reason, we just keep having resistance in that area. Why are we having inexplicably more resistance in that area? Why? Because it has that much more strategic importance, and therefore all things in the universe being counterbalanced, our Maker has allowed a special resistance, a special challenge to give us pushback in that one area that we most need to overcome. So imagine, connect to yourself, think of yourself, think of that area, that mitzvah that's the hardest for you, the one that keeps on challenging you. And now imagine it, rather than as something that you're frustrated about, imagine it as your most precious asset. So precious that the enemy is specifically focusing on it. Let's take a moment to try to think of that mitzvah that is the most difficult, and to now see it as that mitzvah which in this lifetime is apparently the most important and most impactful. We'll take a moment now to envision this, to connect to this feeling. Feel yourself being empowered, knowing that this mitzvah has so much power, so much influence, and that is where the resistance is coming from.
So on the one hand, we said that we can never really know what our, which sparks, which mission, which things are our mission in life. But on the other hand, we can know just by the very, by the very feelings and circumstances that we are in. Why is that? Just because we're in that circumstance, that means that that's our biggest challenge? The answer is yes. And text 12 illustrates this point very, very powerfully. Carol, can I ask you to read for us, please? Text 12.
From the moment that God instructed our forefather Abraham, go from your land, following which it is stated, Abram kept traveling further southward, the mystical process of the rectification of divine sparks was launched. Subsequently, by decree of divine providence, individuals traveled to the locations in which the divine sparks that these specific individuals must rectify await their redemption. Saintly individuals with spiritual vision perceive the locations in which their divine sparks await their engagement, and they take the initiative to journey to those locations. The rest of us are left in the hands of the primary cause behind all causes and the ultimate reason behind all reasons. God orchestrates countless apparent causes and circumstances to bring specific individuals to the locations in which their predestined service of rectification is required.
Thank you, Carol. So You don't have to worry so much about it. So it doesn't always have to be on our minds. Every once in a while, as we see on page 191, if there's something very specific that seems to be your strength or your passion, or the opposite, it's your weakness or your struggle, right? Or it's just a very specific circumstance that only you find yourself in. Okay, so let's say you're a very specific type of specialist, as a very specific type of doctor. Obviously, that means that you're supposed to, right? These are our clues. These are our guiding compasses to help us understand at least which direction our mission is. Other than that, and that's where reincarnation really comes to play. That we should recognize that this might be our soul, powerful, moment that it's supposed to grab by the horns. And now it's time to circle back to page 175 and revisit our answers. Okay, so here we go. You ready? Hold on. No, we did this one already. So we are on page 175. Let's go back to your original answers, true or false. Let's go through all 7 of these. Are we ready? Number 1, belief in reincarnation is basic to Judaism. This is a little bit of a tricky question. And Shlomo, I didn't answer your question from the chat, so I'm going to do it now. Okay, the answer is no. In other words, belief in reincarnation Judaism believes in reincarnation, but it's not basic to Judaism. It's not a principle. So that might be why it was a little bit tricky question, because that word basic. But you can give yourself correct if you wrote true, and what you meant is that Judaism believes in reincarnation. The second one might also be a little tricky. In the Jewish view, reincarnation means that a soul that inhabited our body returns to inhabit another. Okay, so the correct answer is false, because it's not really the same soul. It's another iteration of the soul, but it's really true because it's the same. It comes from the same root soul. But hopefully by now, the true or false part of the question is not really what you're looking for anymore. You have a full picture of it, and hopefully it gives you more of an idea. Number 3, a human soul can be reincarnated in a non-human entity such as an animal or plant. Correct. This is true. It's not a pretty part of life, and hopefully it doesn't happen to any of us, but it is true and it does happen. Okay, number 4, a reincarnated soul does not have its own identity, but shares its identity with someone who lived in a previous lifetime. This is false. Not our identity is shared. Our soul is shared. Remember that the idea we shared about the hard drive and the battery? It's what powers our life. But we each have a very unique personality and identity, and you should not feel that your emotions or your intellect is being driven by somebody from a previous generation. Number 5, the purpose of doing good in one's current lifetime is to be reincarnated as a person of higher status in a future reincarnation. This is not at all the Jewish understanding of the matter. As a matter of fact, I think this comes from Buddhism or Hinduism. I don't remember exactly, but it's not a Jewish perspective at all. We're not looking for a higher status. I guess the closest that Judaism gets this is that sometimes, remember the impregnation, the soul of a tzaddik can come and help us reach a higher status. But it's not some previous soul that's just using your lifetime to reach a higher. That's not what's going on here. We're not looking for upgrades or promotions. Number 6, a soul is reincarnated as a penalty for sins committed in a prior lifetime. Penalty is a strong word. I guess it's correct. I guess it's true, but it's more like rehabilitation. But yeah, I guess that one is true. Number 7, most souls today are reincarnations. That is correct. And in fact, wow, we are really running late here tonight, huh? Hold on one second. We are really running late here. Okay, let's skip text 13. I'll just share it outside, even though it's such a great text. But I'm going to hope that a lot of you have read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor who almost as a result of the Holocaust, ended up disagreeing with Freud about what drives human existence. And his ultimate conclusion is that it's man's search for meaning, to figure out what our purpose and what our life is all about. That is why we live, and that really ties in very much with tonight's lesson. The idea that we spend our whole life looking and doing, and we're doing many mitzvahs, and we're studying a lot of Torah, but we never know when that moment will come, and this struggle will come, and that will be our moment, the reason that our soul is here in this world. The reason I'm kind of glossing over that is because I really want to read text 14. And this is kind of like the most recent that we have, because it's talking about today. It's some insight that we have from the Rebbe. Remember I said there's a fun list that we can go through of certain people that we know of that are reincarnations of other people. This is the most recent one that we have. It comes from the Rebbe. And it's a very, very powerful perspective. Who didn't read yet? I don't know who didn't read yet. Sheila, I don't think you read yet. You still with us? Text 14. Can you read text 14 for us?
Yes.
Go for it.
Can you hear me?
We hear you.
Jewish women and girls play an essential role in the highly critical mission of bringing about the true and complete redemption. The women played an indispensable role in our exodus from Egypt. Indeed, our sages state that our ancestors were redeemed from Egypt in the merit of the deeds of the righteous women. As we have discussed repeatedly, they fulfill this role in each subsequent generation. This is especially true of our present time, for we are the reincarnation of the generation that left Egypt. Indeed, we can clearly observe that Jewish women and girls are naturally predisposed far more readily than the menfolk to the idea of immediately leaving the exile. Less effort is required to convince them that we must leave this exile already than is required to inspire the men.
Thank you, Sheila. I hope the men on this group are not offended. But I would say all the women that of all the couples that I know, almost always the women are much more predisposed to say, okay, Mashiach is on his way. I'm ready. Let's get ready for Mashiach to come. The men have a much harder time with this. They are much more cynical and they have a much harder time. Women are much more spiritual by nature. And I don't know if this was always the case, but certainly in today's day and age it is. And the Rebbe would point out that this is because the Jewish women of today's generation are kind of reincarnated and living that moment that there was from the time of when the Jewish people left exile. Many of you exile in Egypt, I mean, the Exodus. And many of you might be familiar with the idea that when the Jewish people left and they finally came to the splitting of the sea, they weren't sure how to celebrate afterwards. And it ended up being the Jewish women who
Lesson
had,
5.
It ended up being the Jewish women who had these tambourines with them that they were ready. They were ready to celebrate because they believed so much in the Geula, in the redemption from Egypt, that they were ready to celebrate it. And it's the same way when it comes to the final redemption. It's been that way for ages, but it's the same way when it comes to final redemption. Women are kind of primed for that. I will say that my wife actually owns a tambourine that she has on the wall in one of our closets, and it's ready for when Mashiach comes. And that's the plan. Sorry, Astunecha, you were saying something? You're muted. Sorry.
We did that in a class, in a women's class, and
Oh,
so
really?
all of us in the class have tambourines. We are all
right.
ready.
Sounds good. If you don't have a tambourine, order one now. Order one today. It's funny you should say that. I guess it was like a painting class kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
So Gitti's is actually a raw tambourine that she bought years ago, and she wants to design it one day. She hasn't gotten around to it yet. She's like, at least we have the tambourine. One day I'm going to get to actually making it beautiful. And anyways, all right, let's do the overview. And then as a little bonus, we'll go through some of the fun people that we know of throughout history that have been reincarnated, because I think it's a lot of fun. Please turn your attention to the video screens. Let me just make sure you'll have sound. And here we go.
Lesson 5. Where we go again. 1. Adam possessed the Jewish master soul that ultimately branched out into the 600,000 souls that received the Torah at Mount Sinai. All subsequent Jewish souls are offshoots of these soul roots. 2. The 600,000 primary souls were each given a part of the world to perfect through fulfillment of the 613 mitzvot. When a soul accomplishes its mission, it itself also gains rectification and elevation. 3. Every root soul must also study each of the Torah's 4 layers of teaching and uncover its unique part in Torah. 4. Few, if any, of the original souls completed all 613 mitzvot, nor the required study during their original lifetimes. Reincarnation provides souls with additional opportunities to complete their missions and the rectification of the world and themselves. 5. When a person dies, all the refined elements of their soul return to heaven. A new soul, built from the elements that were left unrectified, is then grafted from the stem soul and returned to this world. 6. As a general rule, our souls are reincarnations, but it is impossible to be conscious of or to accurately sense the experiences of our previous lifetimes. 7. Clues to the nature of our soul's unique task in this world can be gleaned from A. Our strengths and passions, B. Our weaknesses and struggles, and C. Our unique life circumstances. 8. The Kabbalistic view of reincarnation does not deny us our personal identity. Each of us is a complete and unique individual who is simultaneously and integrally linked to a far greater reality. Reincarnation ascribes greater importance to our existence and provides each of us a unique role within the overall human mission.
Thank you all for joining us. This has been lesson 5 of Journey of the Soul, Where We Go Again. And please join us next week for the last and final. I know it's sad, the course is coming to an end, but all good things do. Next week is lesson 6. Next week, Monday, lesson 6, Life is Short-ish.